okay? I'm a bit disappointed because Sean told me that I was being honored as a legend tonight. I'm glad I prepared questions just in case. First of all, Dad, I want to tell you what a unique privilege this is for me. I've grown up thinking of you as a legendary father, a legendary friend, and over the past 11... You can't cry yet, man. We're like 30 seconds in. And a legendary boss. Thank you also to the University of Baltimore. We're running a little short on time, so I'm going to jump right into to my questions. Anecdotally, I'm going to ask some questions, and we'll try to leave some time for questions and answers from the audience at the end. Before I begin, and you don't know about this question, I've been handed a very special question from the audience. Don't worry, you know about the rest. It says, Dear Tom, when are you going to retire so your handsome, charming, and intelligent son can take over the business? Funny enough, this note is signed Barbara Bozzuto. Are you regretting this right now? All right, I thought tonight we would start with...
Good, I'm glad you didn't want to start with that one.
Yeah, sorry. Could you tell us a little bit about the Bozzuto Group, give everyone an understanding of what we do?
First of all, let me thank Darlene and Dan and all of the folks at UB for this invitation. It's really, I can assure you, I don't think of myself as a legend, and my wife reminds me routinely that I am not a legend, as do my colleagues at work. But I'm honored to be here, and I'm particularly honored to have the opportunity to do this with Toby. I think 20% of the audience are Bozzuto people, so I'm sure there are others who could do this better than I. But the Bozzuto Group is a full-service residential real estate company. We have four principal operations. We develop apartments, we build apartments and other things, nursing homes, assisted living facilities. We manage apartment communities and some retail, and we are a home builder. Right now we employ about 1,250, 1,300, I can never keep track, people between Northern Virginia and Boston. We do work for our own account. That is, we develop properties where we'll be a partner. And we build and manage both for our own account and for other people. I think right now our construction company is probably building 18 or 19 projects, of which 7 are for us and the rest are for other people. The management company manages about 34,000 units of apartments, and about a third of those are ours.
I think it's very humbling for me to think about how much you've grown our company. I think the audience might be curious as to how you got your start. So if we could go way back, can you tell us a little bit about where you're from and your family?
Sure. I was born in Waterbury, Connecticut. A family of I had two brothers and a sister. My dad and mom were, I guess it's first generation American. My grandfather lived with us until I was 11, and he passed away. My dad worked I don't know how much time we have because I love telling the story, but my dad worked in a factory in a brass mill, and he would go to work at 11 o'clock at night and work until 7 in the morning. When he would come home, have breakfast with us, we'd go off to school. He was an entrepreneur. He had a little oil business, and he would go out and deliver oil. He had 200 or so customers, and he'd go out and deliver oil for a couple of hours. Then he would come home and sleep for 4 or 5 hours, and when we got home from school, he would be up and play ball with us. And my mother would spend all of that time in the kitchen cooking. There was an expression that Mayor Booker of Newark used recently about people who find themselves on third base and think they hit a triple when actually they were born there. I consider myself one of those people who was born on third base. I mean, I had great parents, truly inspirational parents.
Not too much of a stretch. When I was in high school, I told people my grandfather was in the oil business. He was.
Whatever worked, though.
Yeah, whatever worked. You were only the second Bozzuto, your brother being the first to go to college. Tell me where you went and what your experience was like there.
Well, it's interesting. I went to Hobart College, and I am now on the board of trustees, and now they talk about first-generation college students. I was a first-generation college student. And I always say and I'm very proud of this, there was never a semester when I was not on the dean's list. Now, lest you think I'm being arrogant, for the first 2 years, every semester I would get a letter from the dean saying, "You are on my list, you're about to be thrown out." And then I somehow grew up, was inspired, and I really was inspired by, I had a wonderful teacher, and some magic happened, and suddenly I actually ended up on the other academic dean's list and spent the remaining two years on that dean's list. So it was kind of an extraordinary experience.
You were in college in the 60s. That must have been a pretty unique time.
I think.
Do you remember any of it?
I think the thing that most people, I know, Toby's always been jealous of the fact that I went to college in the 60s. I think the real truth is the 60s as you know it, didn't happen until the 70s. And that's kind of, particularly in upstate New York. I mean, when I went to college, we still, we did protest. In fact, I led a lot of protests. But what we were protesting was not the Vietnam War. We were protesting because we wanted to be able to have women in our dormitories. And we did not want anybody to scold us about it. But yeah, it was the 60s. We were protesting, and we had a student government which we abolished, and we did things like that.
After graduating from Hobart, you were planning on attending graduate school. Can you tell the audience what happened that changed your plans?
Actually, I went to graduate school. When I was at Hobart, I did get very caught up in being in the student government. I was so focused on running the college that one day in February of my senior year, the dean of men who I'd become friends with said, "What are you going to do when you graduate?" And I said, "Well, I guess like most seniors, I sort of hated that question." I said, "I'm going to go to law school, I think." He said, "Well, have you taken the board tests?" And I said, "No, when are they?" He said, "They were in October." He said, "What you really ought to think about doing," and remember, this was 1968, and in all seriousness, cities were burning down. And I had always been fascinated by cities, and my walls were covered with posters of New York and Chicago. And he said, "What you really ought to do is think about going to graduate school in urban studies." And so I did. I graduated in May, and I started in June. But this was really getting closer to the 60s. It was 1960, late 68, and I got a draft notice. So actually, I had gotten a Ford Foundation fellowship to go to Calcutta to work in the urban planning office in Calcutta. So I went to my draft board with very long hair and a mustache, and asked for an extension of my deferment. And this woman with, as I recall, purple hair looked at me and said, "Sonny, if you want to go to Southeast Asia, we'll be happy to send you." And I said, no, I want to go to South Asia, not Southeast Asia. And a week later, I was drafted. So That was the 60s.
In a moment, I would like to shift to your business career, but before we leave Vietnam and what was obviously a very important part of your life, can you tell us what the experience was like?
You know, it was a learning experience. I mean, I learned that if you use your head and if you can talk, you can find a way out of anything. When I was in Vietnam, I was assigned to an artillery. I was going to be a forward observer for the artillery, and I was waiting with a bunch of other guys for our trucks to arrive to take us out to the forward observation post. And this NCO, who seemed terribly old to me at the time, I'm sure he was 35, came over and said, "Does anybody here have a degree in journalism?" And I put my hand up. And they always tell you not to volunteer. I think one of the things I learned is you volunteer. Whenever anybody else isn't, you do it. And I put my hand up, and I was the only one. So I went for 4 hours of interviews with this cast of characters, at the end of which I sat down again with Sergeant Perrault, who said, "You don't have a degree in journalism." I said, "I know I have a degree in English, but I write really well, don't I?" And he said, "Yeah, you kind of do." And so the next thing I know is I got a job working in the Division Information Office, escorting the civilian press into combat situations, and writing for Stars and Stripes. So that's what I did for a year.
Sharing a story with the audience, I remember being maybe 13 or 14, going to the Vietnam Memorial with you. And I remember the day. It was like a cloudy, horrible day. And I remember watching you touch some guy's name. And I asked you, and you cried, and I asked you why, or who he was and how he had died. And you told me he was a friend that had been what they call a conscientious objector, which meant he opposed war ethically and morally. So you still get drafted, but you don't have to carry a gun. And I said, "Well, how did he die if he didn't carry a gun?" You said they made him walk in the front. So anyway, out of miserable things came something amazing. Tell me how you ended up married in your 9th month in Vietnam to Mom.
We don't have enough time to tell this story. I mean, as you sort of inferred from my last comment, I was an enlisted man, but I learned in the service how to operate in systems, and I had figured out how to make how to put myself in a position where I could make regular telephone calls. Most of the guys back then, it was long before people had iPhones or other ways of communicating. You know, you had to go and stand in Saigon and say, "I love you, honey," over. And I figured out a way to avoid doing that. I'm not going to go into details on how I did that. But I was calling a few people, and one of whom was your mother, who was a girl I had dated for a month. And during one of those phone conversations, she said she was going to California. She lived in Connecticut, too, and she was going to California for an instructional program, and she thought she could hop over to Hawaii, getting it confused with one of those islands right off the coast of California. And could I get an R&R to Hawaii? And it was like 3 weeks before she was going. And getting an R&R to Hawaii was the hardest ticket to get in Vietnam. And so I went to this officer who I had, a fellow by the name of Frankie DeBella. And I said, "Frank, I've got this problem. Will you help explain this to me? How do I help get this done?" He said, "Just come with me. Keep your mouth shut." And we went to the personnel office. And Frank said, "Look, this guy is dating this Italian girl. And he's an Italian guy. And he knocked her up before he came over here," which was an absolute lie. This was the 60s, you know, and your mom
I don't know where you're going with this.
In any case, it was a lie. But the guy and Frank said to this guy, if you don't give him an R&R to Hawaii so he can get married, her father is going to kill him when he gets home. If he doesn't get killed here first. So I got this R&R to Hawaii, and I called her and I said, you won't believe this, but they actually think they gave me an R&R because they think we're getting married. And I arrived in Hawaii 3 weeks later with absolutely no intention of getting married. And this gal meets me, we walk to the hotel, and I say, I was just kidding about the marriage thing, right? And she starts telling me why I wasn't. And I start going through every excuse I could possibly think of about why we couldn't possibly get married, starting with the fact that we only knew each other. I'd only dated for a month. At the end, I finally said, all right, I give up. You have nothing to wear. And she opened her suitcase and pulled out this pretty dress, a pretty white dress. I said, well, I have nothing to wear. Now I was really drawing for straws. She opened up, it's one of those old Samsonite suitcases that those of you who are older will remember. She opened the other side of the suitcase and pulled out a navy blue suit. And I gave up. And we were married. We were married an hour and a half later. And have been married for 43 years. Let's talk about the company.
Yeah, I was going to say, now that I've made you look good in front of Mom, we're going to have to skip about a decade of your life, but you graduated ultimately from Syracuse University. You went to work for HUD in Baltimore, and then Jim Rouse. And then you ultimately accepted a job for Oxford Development Company. Can you tell us quickly what your role was there?
Sure. I mean, it's like any other job you have for 13 years, your role changes. But I started as a developer with them in 1978, where I was responsible for overseeing projects. And in fact, the very first project I did, I'll just say it just starting construction when I joined the company, is in a project for the elderly up here on McMecken Street called Bolton North. But my job was to oversee those projects, and I would say the first 3,000 units we developed that I was involved in were all affordable housing in one way or another. In any event, I worked with them. Over time, I grew, the responsibility I had grew so that ultimately I ended up running their operation from North Carolina to New Hampshire.
In 1986, the U.S. tax codes changed and Oxford's business model became somewhat obsolete. And at that moment, you were essentially at a crossroads regarding the next steps in your career. Can you tell us what options you had and ultimately what you ended up doing?
Sure. The tax code changed in '86. For the next year and a half, the company really struggled to try and figure out how to be in business, and and it was pretty clear that they were not going to survive in the form that they were in. And I had a number of people, including the Trammell Crow organization, offer me a position. And then I had a number of people who wanted to back me in starting my own company. And what I soon realized was that when they said they wanted to back me, what they really wanted was to own me. And what I decided was, and I say I had the good fortune to have a couple of very close friends at Oxford who became my partners. What we decided was that it was time, for us to make our own mistakes. We had seen other people make mistakes. I mean, anybody who works, including all of you who work in our company, I know when you go to a bar, you complain about the idiot who's running the organization. Well, I was tired of having other people run the organization, and I wanted to do it myself. And so we decided to start our own business.
I remember sitting around the dinner table, and when I was little, and coming to the table and saying, I have two options. I have a job offer from Trammell Crow, which is an incredible company for those of you that know, or I can start my own business. Okay, and you said, if I take the Trammell Crow job, I'll be paid quite well and I'll be a regional vice president or something of that effect. And if I start my own company, we won't have any money for at least 3 or 4 years. He said, now let's take a vote. As you can imagine, I voted that you go to work for Trammell Crow. This is a personal question for me. Speaking of high school, do you remember the night Mom's car mysteriously drove itself into a ditch? I, of course, had nothing to do with it, so here's my question. Do you think it was fair to ground me for 6 weeks?
Let me make a comment.
I didn't actually expect you to answer that question.
Let me make a comment about your vote. Not your vote, but the vote. I mean, one of the things, and we don't have the time to talk about my decision when I left HUD or my decision when I left the Rouse Company and joined Oxford. But every decision I made, when I left HUD, when I left Rouse, when I left Oxford and started my own business, every one involved a pay cut. And your mother was incredibly supportive, but when I mean, these numbers are sort of laughable, I suppose, today. But when I left HUD, I was making $15,000 a year, which was a big increase from where I had started 2 years earlier. And I took a job with Rouse at $13,000 a year. And when I left Rouse, I was making, as I recall, 18 or 19, and we moved to Boston, and I made, which was a more expensive place to live, and I made 17. I think, you know, in my case, I've always made a decision based on where I wanted to go long term, rather than what was going to happen in the next week.
Well, starting a new company clearly requires a tremendous amount of passion. I'm personally curious, and I'm sure the audience is to what drives you and what's been the main motivator in your career?
Well, as my last answer demonstrated, it hasn't been money. I've been very fortunate, and I've been very blessed by success. And I won't pretend that we don't worry about, you know, and the people who work with us have heard me say we've got to raise the rent. So I'm not, I'm not running a nonprofit. But my motivation has always been to do something meaningful. I've never quite been sure I know exactly what I've meant by that, but I've always felt that I wanted to do something with my life that when I was done, I could say I accomplished something. And in our business, we've run our business with the notion that we were going to perform an exceptional service in the way we built our buildings, the way we manage our buildings, the way we deliver service to the customer, the way we deal with our partners, the way we deal with our lenders. And if we do that, we'll make money. And frankly, that's been what's allowed us to grow and make money.
I know that we have modeled our management company using your thought about service largely around, call it a Ritz-Carlton model. I've always loved their motto, which is ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen. Our corporate motto is founded on values, built on integrity. Can you tell me what the words values and integrity mean to you and to all of our employees?
Sure. I mean, it's really simple. Really, really, really simple. It simply means doing what you say you're going to do. What's more interesting, I guess, is the story of how we came up with that motto. We like any other CEO who grows a company, at some point you have a marketing person come in to you and say, well, I can't do any more advertising because I don't know that we've ever clearly defined our brand. So we need to do brand research. The first time we did brand research, we had an ad agency do it, and after spending $50,000, they said, we're ready to present our report. You all go into a room. So my partners and I went into the room, into a conference room, and then they came in singing. It's the old old 60s tune, It's the Way You Do the Things You Do? We fired them that afternoon. And we forgot doing brand research for about 2 years, and then somebody else proposed a new marketing director, because the prior one had also gone away. But the new marketing director recommended that we do brand research, and we spent about 3 times that amount of money, did all these detailed interviews, and we got a much more sophisticated presentation, which basically said the same thing. People know our company and think of our company, whether it's our bankers, our clients, our lenders, our renters, because we actually deliver what we promise we're going to deliver. And my comment to hearing that and reading the report was, so what? Isn't that sort of the least you can do? And what we were told is that particularly in the Washington area, which is where we keep our headquarters, people are very cynical about business for fairly obvious reasons. Business people give them lots of good reasons to be cynical. And so if somebody actually delivers on what they say they're going to do and actually does what they say they're going to do and lives the words they use, they're shocked. And so that's what it means. It means simply doing what you say you're going to do. If you say you're going to build a building on time, on budget, you build it on time and on budget.
It reminds me of our 4 corporate values, which are concern, creativity, passion, and perfection. Tell me how these values drive our day-to-day business and the decisions that we make.
When our company was still quite small, I think there were probably 30 or 40 of us, but growing. And we realized we were growing and we were hiring people. We were trying to figure out what words could describe the kind of culture we wanted to encourage in our company. And it was a very conscious thing where a group of us sat around and talked about it, and then 2 of us, one of my partners and I, actually sat in a room writing these words and tried to keep it very, very simple, something that everybody can understand and that everybody could remember. And, you learn, I think, as much about how to run a business or lead a life from bad examples as you do from good examples. The company I had worked for before Oxford had a collection of policy manuals that had to be, volumes this big. There had to be 7 or 8 of them. And nobody ever looked at them unless they wanted to fire somebody. And then you'd find something that somebody had done wrong. How can you God did it with, 10 rules. These people need 7,000. And so what we decided is if we wanted to encourage and go further and say we wanted to be able to expect certain behaviors from our employees, it was better to give them moral guideposts, if you will, or value guideposts that told them the kind of behavior that we'd expect, and then let them make the decisions that were consistent with that behavior. And it works. It works.
You've structured our company into 4 distinct operating businesses. We have a management company, a construction company, a development company, and a home building company. In what is an extraordinarily cyclical real estate business, how does this vertically integrated structure help us to navigate choppy waters?
We did this, again, the history of why we did this is that when we started the company, we were going to be purely a company that developed, built, and managed apartments for our own account. And then in 1992, we began to see there wasn't going to be a lot of money, that there could be periods when you couldn't get capital, or worse periods when you could get capital, but you'd end up doing projects that didn't make any sense. And so we decided to get into the business of providing service to other people. Actually, the first thing we did was to get into home building as just sort of a natural expansion of what we were doing. And then we decided to get into the service business, and we began building a project for a nonprofit group. And then we started to manage a project for a bank that had foreclosed on an apartment project. And over time, this service business took on a life of its own, so that our construction company, which is now fully bonded, has a backlog of something in the range of $300 million or more a year. Our management company manages 34,000 apartment units. What happens is it gives us the flexibility so that during a period like the early part of this decade, when home building is great, we could make a lot of money building homes. And then during the middle part of the decade, when we were giving back all the money we had made in the early part of the decade because the home building business cratered, and there were no apartments to be developed, it didn't make any sense to develop apartments, we were really dependent on the revenues from our management company and our construction company. So it's a balanced approach to running a business. And you know, I always assumed that you never, if you're an investor, you have a diversified portfolio. You should do the same thing in running a business. That putting all your money in one strategy was a very dangerous way to go.
Bozzuto's recently put an enormous amount of emphasis upon excellent design in our projects. In fact, this is a UB fact, Harvard Graduate School of Design is currently doing a case study for presentation in their architecture and business school on Fitzgerald here in Baltimore, with their thesis is as to whether or not design drives value. And if I could tell you anecdotally, when we planned the Fitzgerald right up the street, we underwrote it at $1.60 a foot. That's just one of the metrics we use. One of the neighboring projects was also at $1.60 a foot. We now get $2.15 a foot. Our neighbor gets $1.62. We happen to believe it's because of design and some other intangibles, but I'm wondering what your thoughts are on our push into design.
Well, I think they, I think we've always taken a certain amount of pride in the design of our projects. I think you, frankly, personally, Toby, have led us even further in that area, and deserve great credit for that. I've always felt, and this is not to take anything away from our leasing people at all, who I think are spectacular, but I think a renter or a home buyer will, to some degree, make a purchase or rental decision when they first see a property. Because I think there is a thought process that goes on that says, would I be proud to show this property to my mother? Would I be proud to show this property to my significant other? Would I be proud to bring a friend home to this property? And I think design plays a big role in creating that getting the right answer in that decision.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, at the end of the day, we're selling a product, renting it, as it were, to a consumer, and I believe that consumers are ultimately aspirational. And when you walk into a space like a Walmart, it has no soul, and you do not feel uplifted. You may feel a value, and that may be okay, and what you're looking for, but there's something about making a decision for living, which you've used the word sanctuary before to me, that if you can walk into your home and feel elevated by the experience created by design, I think that we both agree that that's an important thing.
Absolutely.
Perhaps a selfish question, but...
You're going to ask me when I'm retiring again?
No.
People keep asking me how Thanksgiving was. I was asked 3 times Thanksgiving Day when I was going to retire. It was lousy.
Yeah. In 2001, I joined the company, and I'm curious what your thoughts are. I mean, I have a son. He's 5, so it's going to be quite some time, maybe my daughters as well. But what's it like working with me? great, right?
Yeah, terrific. It's an extraordinary experience. I mean, it really is. I think there's sort of this whole there are lots of people, men and women, I know who have a son or a daughter working for them, and it's sort of this whole club of people who it's an experience that's fairly unique. When Toby, let me answer the question, and I'll tell you a little bit about how we dealt with it. It's one of those things.
Dealt with it. I'm not a disease.
It's one of those things where, on one hand, it's extraordinarily gratifying. When you watch your son, find a deal, when you watch him do something just terrifically, it's wonderfully gratifying. On the other hand, and it would be true for a daughter as well in business with you. On the other hand, there are times when it's a little diminishing. For an example, when I run into Governor O'Malley and the first words out of his mouth are, "Where's Toby?" And I say, "Whose name do you think you see on the check, buddy?" And he's looking for Toby. But it's when it became obvious that Toby not only was serious about the business, and one of the things we did, and was one of my partners who really put Toby on this track, is we wouldn't let him join the company. First of all, he didn't have any interest in real estate for a couple of years out of college, and then we wouldn't let him join us for another 5 or 6 years after that. But when he did join us, and it became obvious that he both liked it and was good at it, we decided that we ought to go to this program at Harvard and there are lots of others around the country that I'm sure are equally good, but they had a program on families and business. And it was a fascinating program because what you realize is every company has succession issues that they have to deal with, family business or non-family business. It is materially complicated by having a family business. And whether it's in Australia or whether it's in Argentina or whether it's in Washington, many of the problems are the same. And some of the counseling, some of the advice you get is absolutely counterintuitive. But it was very, very helpful. I think you got to approach this like you approach everything else, which is with, some degree of intellect in trying to evaluate the risks, the pros and cons. It's not easy. I think, frankly, it's probably more difficult for you than it is for me. I think it's much more difficult to be the offspring of the founder of a business in a company, in the founder's company, than it is to be the founder. I invent myself every day. Everybody will forever, or maybe until about 10 years ago, would always compare with me. Now I don't think that quite happens as much, and hopefully, I suspect it will stop happening entirely.
Thank you for that answer. I think I have time for probably one or two more quick questions. And then, Sean, are we going to take a question or two from the audience? Okay, so quickly here. Bozzuto's been in business now for 25 years in April. To what do you attribute our longevity, and what do you think we need to do to survive another 25 years?
I'll give you quick answers. I've been blessed with great partners. And so I would tell you we've been successful. We've survived because we haven't tried to hit the ball out of the park every time we've gotten up to the plate. Because we've tried to do what we've said we were going to do. Because we've hedged our risks. Because we've focused every day on answering the question, how are we different than our competitors? And most importantly, because we've surrounded ourselves with great people and made sure that they've shared our value system. And as far as how we survive the next 25 years, I think there's no reason to think we shouldn't do the same thing going forward. I mean, there are going to be changes. They're going to be ours is a very capital-intensive business. The sources of capital have changed dramatically in the 25 years, in the 40 years I've been in the business. I suspect they're going to change a lot more over the next 25 years, 40 years. I think as long as we keep focused on who we are and how we differentiate ourselves from other people, I think we'll be fine.
Last question I have is, when people look back at your life, how do you want to be remembered?
Other than as your father, as somebody who made a difference.
Thank you.
I don't know if you
that's
no longer answer to that one.
I guess we have time for maybe one or two questions, Sean. Is that correct?
Anybody have a question? Yes. Mike, hold on one second. Let me give you the mic.
I think Sean has a microphone if you need it.
Thanks, Sean. Tom, we know of your successes, but you don't learn from success. You learn from failure. Can you give us a story about a failure and what you learned from it?
I had that question and he crossed it off. So thank you for asking it.
My wife would tell you that my great skill is the ability to forget my failures. Sure.
In 2008, when we were a pretty large company.
Let me go back to 2005 and 2006, and I'll use the first person singular, was seeing what was going on in the home building business and was recognizing that it was nutty. And I mean, I was certain enough of it so that on a stage like this at NAHB's headquarters, the home builders headquarters in downtown Washington, I said it was absolutely ludicrous to think that home prices should have changed 100% between 1999 and 2005 in Washington, D.C., and they had. And yet, when my home building guys kept bringing in deals with no discipline at all on the cost side, costs kept going up, and frankly, I was hearing, but don't worry about it, our sales prices are going to go up faster. I didn't have the backbone to say, you're out of here. We're not going to do these deals. And I let them, I didn't follow my instincts, which should have been to say no. And I allowed some deals to get done that we ended up paying very, very, very dearly for. And so how did we correct for it? The economy corrected it. We paid a lot of money to finish those projects. None of those people we shrunk our home building operation dramatically, and restaffed it with people who were less inclined to believe their own stuff.
Are there any other questions?
I heard the other day that there is a 3.5% vacancy in apartments in Virginia and a 3.7% vacancy in apartments in Maryland. And many people have also suggested that the apartment market is going to be as overbuilt or is getting overbuilt. What is your opinion on that?
Well, I know the numbers better for the Washington metropolitan area than I know them for Baltimore. So, and since you asked about Virginia, let me let me tell you that Washington normally, in a typical year, on average, has absorbed 5,500 apartment units a year regionally. There is a backlog of projects under construction totaling that will be delivered in the next 24 months of something in the range of 18,000 units. So there's
30,000 in the pipeline.
and 30,000 more in the pipeline. Now, so clearly there's going to be an oversupply problem. And you know, on the other hand, I don't believe it's the end of the world for a variety of reasons. We are a business, the apartment business is a business that is driven by two things. It's driven by demographics, and we're driven by jobs. You could have all the jobs in the world, but if you don't have the right population group, you're not going to rent apartments. Or you can, as is currently the case, have a great demographic group who wants apartments with an inadequate supply of jobs. We have the largest population in American history going through colleges today, coming out, who want to rent apartments. I mean, the typical American does not want to own a home until they're, until they're married or settled down. And so we've got great demand, and then and furthermore, a lot of these people want to live in the cities. I mean, they want to live in Boston, they want to live in Washington, they want to live in San Francisco, they want to live in Chicago and New York. And then secondarily in places like Baltimore or Cincinnati. And I think if we had an adequate number of jobs being created in this country, we would have more than enough demand to absorb every apartment unit that we could possibly supply. So the real answer is we need to create more jobs, not build fewer apartments.
I think we have time for one more question.
Mr. Bozzuto, you've talked about your experience in the past and how real estate was such a focus for you. Going forward, having gone through this past decade, what area specifically in the real estate industry excites you the most? If you were getting into real estate today, what avenues would you pursue?
It's a great question. It's interesting, when you started your question, I was almost going to correct you and say I really wasn't interested in real estate. I was interested in providing people's homes. And, you know, what Toby didn't mention is that of the 40,000, 50, whatever, what's the number, 50,000 units of homes that I've been involved in, something like 7,500 have been affordable. And so I would tell you what the area that I've always been passionate about is the American home, the apartment primarily. And as you look at real estate as a business, what's happened is it's become more interesting. The home has become more interesting than it was when I started in the business, because people want to live in higher density places, which means mixed use. And so I happen to think both what I love and where there are opportunities are in mixed-use residential development. I think that I wouldn't want to be in the office building business, honestly. It doesn't make any sense to me. I think we're going through a seismic change in the use of office space in America. I walk through our office, and on Monday morning, particularly the first Monday of the month, every inch of space is used. I walked through our office on a Tuesday afternoon, and you could shoot a cannon and not hit anybody. So I don't understand what's going on in the office space, but technology is changing that dramatically, and I wouldn't want to be owning office space. Warehouse space, industrial space, I don't know enough about it. Hotels, I think, are a good area. But I love the apartment business. I think the home building business will not ever go away. And I think the outcome of the recession is going to be that there will be a far larger percentage of that business will be done by publicly traded companies, and far less by the mom and pop home builder who have done it forever. But
Thank you very much. Our sincere appreciation, and I'm very glad to hear you're not getting in the office business. We'll handle that side. So, you look too comfortable there, Tom. Can I get you to stand up here? We have a little something for you. We thought, as just a token of our appreciation, we'd present to you a small plaque. I thought a timepiece was very fitting for a legend. In fact, I took out the battery so it's timeless, like a legend. But I'll hand that to you, and just in case you'd like a clock that works, I'll give you the battery. I'll find it later. I'll give that to you.
that's great. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you very much, Tom.
Thank you.